This conference is now being recorded.
Welcome to the New York State Association of School Business Officials webinar. Today's program is Accountability for Parentally Placed Special Education Private School Students webinar. Your host for today is Donna Clement, Director of Professional Development with New York State ASBO. Operator assistance is available at any time during this conference by pressing £0. A question and answer session will follow the presentation. You may send chat questions during the presentation using the chat window indicated by a speech bubble icon located to the right of the presentation. Please address chat questions to the Q&A group using a drop-down list located at the bottom of the chat window. I'll now turn the call over to our host. Donna, please begin.
Thank you, Michelle, and welcome everyone to our session today. Certainly an interesting topic, or one that has many details and can be very difficult if you're not up on all that is needed for this special part of the accounting piece that you're involved in. And we're so pleased that Lisa Cardinelli was available and willing to do this webinar for us. So without any more introduction, I'm going to have Lisa talk to you about her background and go right into the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Donna. Hello, everyone. I recognize some of the names on the list, so it's very nice to be speaking with all of you again. This is a little different venue than what I'm accustomed to. I usually am accustomed to speaking in large groups in front of many of you in the past, and this is a great opportunity for me to get back in touch with all of you. For those of you that don't know who I am, I used to work for the Questar 3 BOCES State Aid and Financial Planning Service. I was there for about 7 years and left about a year and a half ago and started my own consulting company, Edgewater Consulting Company, and where I provide services to school districts throughout New York State. One of the areas I developed a specialty in while I was at Questar and continue to assist a lot of districts in is in the area of special education. I'm sure you all are well aware of the strong need of training that there is and the confusion that exists around the topic. So today, hopefully, we will answer some of the questions and give you a good overview of this very important process as you're in the midst of planning your budgets and going through the whole STAC process. So I want to thank you all for participating, and we'll start with going over the agenda that we're going to cover today. We're going to start with a discussion of the STAC process for the most common STAC placements, which are your 10-month public and private placements and your summer placements. There are other STAC placements, but these are the most common where a lot of the questions arise. So we're going to talk about these three types of STAC placements. I also have developed for you a STAC timeline so that you can get a sense of when things should be processed throughout the year so that you're timely with all your STAC filing deadlines, and it maximizes the cash flow and you're not in jeopardy of running into past deadlines. So hopefully you'll find that helpful. Also, if you're new to your district, or maybe you're thinking of going to another district, it's helpful sometimes to determine if STACs are getting processed accurately and effectively in the district that you're in. Or maybe you have a person in your office that's in charge of doing the STAC filings, and it's sort of a way to just check up on them and make sure that things are being done correctly. Or even for the business office and the special ed office where they work in this process together, it serves as a second set of eyes. So we're going to talk about how you can, a few tips on how you can check and see if STACs are being processed accurately in your district. And then lastly, we're going to talk about the state aid reporting for parentally placed special education students in non-public schools. This was a new law that came about several years ago. We saw a change in the responsibility for educating these students and in the reimbursement process for these students as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about the proper state aid reporting for these students. If any of you have non-public schools within your district, this would be an area you'd want to pay particular attention to. And then at the end, we will have questions and answers, which I believe Donna is going to moderate for us. So we will start with talking about the STAC process for your 10-month public placements. STACs for these public placements generate public excess high-cost aid the year after the student's enrollment. So the students that were enrolled and served during the 08-09 school year are who you're getting your aid on now this year in 9-10. And the students you're serving this year in 9-10 will be aided next year in the 10-11 school year. It's important as you go through the process to have a good understanding of the formula and how the aid is actually calculated. So the formula for the reimbursement of these students is where you would take your annualized tuition less the district's high-cost threshold. And that result gets multiplied by the FTE of the student and then times the public excess cost aid ratio. So as you can see from this formula, because you're deducting the high-cost threshold, you're only aided on the amount that's in excess of this threshold. So it stands to reason that you would only stack students that are above this high-cost threshold. The district's high-cost threshold is different for every district, and it changes each year. And you can find out what your district's high-cost threshold is by looking at line 5 of your public excess cost aid output report, which you can find on the state aid unit's website. Essentially, it's 3 times the AOE per TAPU. Now, AOE per TAPU is an acronym that's used, and it stands for the Approved Operating Expense per Total Aidable Pupil Unit. Simply put, it's really the instructional costs per student. Your approved operating expenses are the instructional costs of running the district, and it takes out things like debt service and transportation, certain BOCES expenditures, things that are not instructional in nature. So you're left with just the instructional costs, and then they divide that by the pupil count, the total aidable pupil unit, to come up with instructional costs per pupil. And that high-cost threshold, or the amount in which they're going to give you the additional high-cost aid for special ed students, is 3 times that amount. And again, on line 5 of your public excess cost aid output report is where you can find your district's high-cost threshold. The aid ratio that's used in the formula is based on district wealth measures. So it stands to reason, as in a lot of state aid formulas, that wealthier districts tend to have lower aid ratios and poorer districts have higher aid ratios. And there's a minimum 25% is the lowest aid ratio that there is in the formula, and many wealthy districts will have that 25% aid ratio. So moving on, to getting more into this process for the public placements, since you can see how the formula works, you're only going to stack the students that exceed your threshold. And for public placements, that covers your in-district students, the students that you send out to a BOCES program. BOCES programs are considered public placements. Or perhaps you send a student to another public school. If you don't have a program suitable in your school, you may contract with a neighboring public school district and send a student there. Those are all considered public placements. So for your BOCES students, you're going to look at the annualized tuitions that are charged by BOCES. And don't forget, if you provide some services over and above that BOCES program, from the district or from district employees, you would want to add that cost in too when you're putting in the annualized tuition on the STAC form. For example, perhaps you send a student to a BOCES program, but you provide the one-on-one aid with a district employee. You would want to add the cost of that one-on-one aid to the BOCES tuition to get the total annualized cost for that BOCES student. For in-district placements, we're going to talk in more detail about that because that's the hardest part of the STAC process for public placements, is calculating the tuitions for the in-district students. And it's an area where a lot of districts kind of fall short on the mark, if you will. They don't do the calculations. They don't feel that any of their in-district students are going to exceed the threshold. So it's typical that I find a lot of districts, particularly those that have higher thresholds, don't stack their in-district students. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that next. But for students that may attend another public school, you're going to use for the annualized tuition you're going to use that tuition that's charged by that other public school district. They send you a bill each year, and that is what you would use for the annualized tuition, stacking those students. And be careful of this. Just to note that, districts should be using the non-resident tuition rates for students that they educate in district programs. And I have experienced that the STAC unit will not aid students attending other public schools in an amount greater than the NRT rates. So if you're getting a bill from another public school and it's greater than their non-resident tuition rate, chances are the STAC unit will only reimburse that STAC based on that non-resident tuition rate, regardless of what the other district charged you. So be careful of that if you're contracting with other school districts and they're going to be billing you more than their non-resident tuition rate. You stand a good chance of not being able to get the aid on that additional amount. So for these types of placements, these are the things that you would use to develop the annualized tuition when doing the STAC form. When you file the STAC forms, you're going to enter them through the STAC unit's online system. And I've provided a link for you. If you're not familiar with the online system, this is how you would gain access to it. All STACs should be entered through the online system. You always enter the 10-month annualized costs for tuition, even if the student was there less than a full year, because you also enter the correct start and end dates of the student enrollment, and when they calculate the aid, they will automatically prorate that annualized tuition based on the start and end dates. That start and end date, when you enter it on the STAC form, an FTE will be calculated. And remember, FTEs are enrollment-based, not attendance-based, okay? The FTE represents the enrollment dates that the student was enrolled in the program. And so when you enter the STAC form, you put the correct start and end date of the student's enrollment, it will automatically prorate the 10-month tuition that you entered in the tuition field on the STAC form. The very last bullet on this screen here is really important. Verifying STACs through the automated verification listings, or AVLs we call them, is the final part of the claim process. You can stack all you want, all year long, all your placements, but if you fail to verify them, your aid will not be paid. So it's very important that you process your verifications on AVLs where you're verifying the information that you entered on the STAC form. Some AVLs are still done on paper. Your public placements are still done on paper. And the AVL, for those of you that may not be familiar with what it looks like, but it's the big 11 by 17 green bar paper that comes with the tractor-fed margins, if you will, like the old-time dot matrix printers. That's the AVL. And for public placements, your in-district and your BOCES, they still come to the district on paper. And they usually give you about a month to verify them. You're verifying the dates of enrollment and the cost and the placement, and you have to send it back to the STAC unit for your aid to be paid. Other placements, which we're going to talk about later, are now verified through the STAC online system. There's a new mechanism on the online system for online AVL verifications, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Just to note that any day now, you folks should be getting an AVL for your BOCES placements, your 0809 BOCES placements, where they'll be asking you to verify these placements. Usually that AVL comes out in February, and it'll be due back sometime, usually in March. If you do not verify your STACs, you will not get your aid. Just want to emphasize that. Okay, next we're going to talk about calculating the cost for your in-district students. As I mentioned before, this is an area that is the most difficult in the process for public placements. You only calculate the cost of the special education services that are listed on the student's IEP. You do not include transportation here. You do not include administrative costs or costs of the CSE or costs of evaluations. The only costs that you include when you're doing the calculation are the direct service special ed costs, special ed services that are listed on the student's IEP, typically under the program and related services section of the child's IEP is where you would find these services, and that's what you're going to cost out to come up with the annualized tuition to stack your in-district students. As I mentioned before, for your other public placements, it's fairly easy. Stacking your BOCES kids, you're going to look at what BOCES charges you, and stacking students that go to other public school districts, you're going to use what the other public school district charged you. For your in-district students, you have to go through the task of calculating what their cost is and what it's costing you to provide these services to them. The tuitions that you develop as you cost these students out should be as student-specific as possible. You should use the actual cost, what it actually costs you, and not averages. So that means you should be costing out all the providers separately. And a lot of people don't do this. They use averages. And that's not really a recommendation from the STAC unit. They want to make sure that, you cost out the cost of this speech teacher that's providing services to these students versus, a speech teacher that may cost the district more or less, and what the cost is for the students that speech teacher serves. So you want it as student-specific as possible based on the actual providers that serve that particular student. You're going to calculate the cost of their program, their related services, and you're going to use the frequency, the duration, and the ratio to do that specific cost. So, in other words, you would come up with a different cost for a group session of speech as you would for an individual session of speech. So as you can see, there's an awful lot that goes into this process, and you really have to go through all the different variables in the student's services to come up with a student-specific cost. You can also include the cost of specialized equipment that the student may have listed as a requirement on their IEP, and you would do this only in the year that it's purchased for use by that individual student. Be sure when you're costing out the providers and the staff members for your students that you include all the benefits that the district pays on their behalf in addition to their salary. And, basically the students that would qualify for exceeding your high cost threshold are obviously going to be the students that get the most services. Students that are in the self-contained classrooms, students that have one-to-one aides, or students that get a lot of related services and have specialized equipment. Those are the students that you would really want to look at to determine whether or not they qualify for stacking. So you go through the task of calculating their tuition and finding out if their 10-month tuition exceeds your high-cost threshold, and if it does, then the student should be stacked. There's also an additional form that needs to be completed if any of the in-district tuitions exceed $85,000. The STAC unit basically wants extra details on the costs for that student, and they will often ask you for backup invoices to support certain costs that you're claiming. So it's important that you keep good records and you develop a good process and system for tracking all of these costs throughout the year, so that when you have to calculate them, you're able to get all the information together. It's really important that the business office and the special education department work together in this process, because the special ed department has access to the student information, the class lists, the one-to-one aid assignments, access to the IEP so that they can see the services that the students are getting. And of course, the business office has the costing information regarding the salaries and the benefits of the providers, the contracts, if you contract with an outside agency to provide some services. So the two departments need to work together in this process to really make it work. And you should have scheduled regular meetings throughout the year to keep track of the process and develop a system to accurately cost these students out each year. Now you can all see why a lot of districts tend to not calculate their in-district tuitions because there's an awful lot to it. Moving on to private placements, luckily these are a lot easier than public placements that we just talked about. These two stacks for these students generate aid the year after their enrollment. So once again, students that were in private schools in 08-09 are being aided now during 9-10. And the formula here is a little bit different than that that we saw for public placements. You're going to take the approved tuition rate, which is set by the state education department, so there's nothing for you to have to calculate here. That's really what makes this process a whole lot easier. That approved tuition rate less the district's basic contribution, which essentially is your tax levy per pupil. That result gets multiplied by the FTE of the student and then by the private excess cost aid ratio. Just like under the public excess cost aid ratio, that too is based on district wealth, where wealthier districts will have a lower aid ratio than poorer districts. But the formula used in calculating that aid ratio is a little bit different, so that the private excess cost aid ratio for all districts is always higher and often considerably higher than it is under public excess cost aid. And the theory behind that is that typically these placements cost a lot more to districts, and there's a greater reimbursement for them. We've seen some changes in that recently, over the last several years, where, I see a lot of BOCES tuitions very, very high, and even a lot of in-district costs very, very high, just as high as some private placements. And we're seeing more and more districts are bringing students back in from private schools or from BOCES placements. So I think gone are the days when the in-district tuitions are a lot less than what we saw with BOCES or private schools. Just another reason to, make sure that you're stacking all the students who qualify for the additional aid. You stack all approved private placements regardless of their cost. There's really no high cost threshold per se here in private. True, you are only aided on the amount in excess of the district's basic contribution or tax levy per pupil, but your tax levy per pupil is almost always less than what the approved tuition rate would be for schools. So we say that you just go ahead and stack all approved private placements. As long as it's a New York State or an out-of-state approved school, then you would go ahead and stack that child regardless of the cost. The one step that is different in private placements than what we have in public is that there's a pre-approval form that must be completed first, and that is called the DOSES form, DOSES, and that is the screen name. If you go onto the online system, that is the screen name where you would click to get into the pre-approval form, and that form must be completed before you stack the student and before the placement is actually made, because that form asks for various dates of evaluations and examinations and things like that. So it becomes effective the day that you process that DOSES form. So you cannot, start the start date of a stack prior to getting the effective date of that DOSES form in. A lot of districts forget to do the DOSES forms, and then they go to STAC, and the STAC system won't even allow the STAC to go through if the DOSES form has not been done prior to the placement. So it's important that as soon as you have that CSE meeting and you determine that the student is going to go to the private placement, that you do the DOSES form so that the effective date becomes valid prior to you actually starting the student's enrollment in the private school. The other key thing I want to mention is that you cannot add any cost to the SED-approved rates. So in other words, if you're sending a student to a private school and for whatever reason that student's IEP calls for them to get speech, let's say, for example, and that private school doesn't provide speech. This is just an example. So the district is going to provide speech to that student in addition to the services they get from the private school. You have to do so at your own cost. You cannot get any reimbursement for those additional services. If you tell the STAC unit that the child IEP calls for speech, they'll tell you that that private school is not an appropriate placement, and you should place the student in a school that provides all the services required by the student's IEP. So just be careful of that if you're going to place a child in a private school that does not offer all the services that they require. Those additional services that you provide will not be reimbursable to you. Some checks and balances that you should follow to make sure that you do stack all your private school students would be, obviously, look at the private school bills that you get in the district. Trust me, if they're educating a student of yours, they're going to send you a bill. So a great way to make sure that you've stacked all your private school students would be to look at all the bills that you've received from the private schools. Also, look at your ClearTrack and IEP Direct databases and run lists of students in private schools to make sure that you have stacked them all. Another key thing that you want to make sure here is that the approved rates that the school has, the private school has, is what the private school is billing you. Districts are not obligated to pay anything more than the state-approved rates, and you will not be reimbursed on what you pay. You will be reimbursed on whatever the state-approved rate is. So they really should be the same. The verification for your private placements is one of the ones that we now do through the online system. No longer do you get paper AVLs for these placements. There is on the main menu on the STAC Online system, there is an option for online verification, and that's how you verify the placements for your private students. You're not really verifying the cost so much because you have no control over that. When you're doing these AVLs, you're verifying the enrollment dates and that the student was actually in that placement. Okay, moving on to summer placements. STACs for summer placements should be done during the summer when the student has completed the summer program, because it is a current year aid. It's not like the 10-month placement where you're aided the year after the student's enrollment. For any students whose IEP calls for extended school year services, you would do one STAC for the 10-month program, and then you do another STAC for the 2-month program for July and August. And as I said, you want to try to file those STACs in the current year to maximize your cash flow. They say it's a current year aid, but truthfully, they appropriate only X amount of dollars each year to pay for summer programs. So, because of rate changes and prior year STACs that often get filed, lots of times those placements will eat up a good portion of that pot of money each year that they appropriate to pay these placements. So the current year reimbursements will often be less than the full amount that they really owe the district for the current year STACs. But you will receive the money in the coming year, in the following year, for that placement. But you still want to get the STACs in as quickly as possible once the student has finished the program. The reimbursement for summer placements currently is 80% of whatever the approved rate. So just like under private 10-month placements, the state sets the rates for all summer programs, regardless of if it's a BOCES program or your own district program or a private school program. The state sets the rates for all summer programs and for all providers. You get back 80% of the approved rate for the education program, for the transportation that you enter on the STAC form. This is the one instance where transportation is aided through the STAC process. As I mentioned, in the 10-month program, transportation is not included on STAC forms. You receive transportation aid for transportation costs during the 10-month program. But for the summer, you do include that on the STAC. And also maintenance if you have a student in a residential facility. One thing to note here that the governor has recently proposed as part of his budget proposal that came out last month, a change in this 80% reimbursement rate. And this could have a major impact, especially on wealthier districts, because what the governor is proposing is that instead of everyone getting an 80% reimbursement of the approved rate for education, that it be changed to whatever the district's state sharing ratio for foundation aid is. And that aid ratio is wealth-driven. So wealthier districts would have a lower aid ratio, and poorer districts would have a higher aid ratio, higher state sharing ratio for foundation aid. The minimum is 10% and the maximum is 80% under his proposal. So I looked at some wealthy districts and, in geographic areas of the state where we typically see lower aid ratios, Long Island particularly, and Westchester, Rockland County areas. Many of these districts' reimbursement for summer programs would go from the current 80%, in many cases, down to 10%, the minimum, under this proposal. So this is really something that bears an awful lot of watching for those of you that have a lot of summer placements. Should this proposal pass, this change in the reimbursement percentage would apply to all summer placements, BOCES placements, private school placements, and your in-district students. It would become whatever your state sharing ratio is, that percentage times the approved rate for that particular program. So if it's a BOCES program, it would be, that new percentage times the BOCES approved rate. So just something that I wanted to mention as you're kind of in the midst of doing your budgets now. If this should pass, this obviously would have a big impact on school districts' budgets, because you'd have to support these programs a lot more than what you do now. These programs are, the expenses and the revenue for these programs for summer are recorded in your special aid fund. However, typically with the 80% reimbursement, you'd get back 80% of your costs, and then you would, support from the general fund the remaining 20%. If your aid ratio drops down to 10%, let's say, then you're only getting the 10% reimbursement, and now your general fund would have to support 90% of the cost of these programs. So it could have a very big impact, especially for wealthier districts. So it definitely bears some watching. Just to recap here, for all summer placements in district BOCES, other public schools or private schools, you would want to file the STAC forms for them. Okay, moving on a little bit more to further our discussion for summer placements. The approved rates, as I mentioned, for these programs are set by the state. And one of the areas that causes an awful lot of problems for districts is if they choose to run their own in-district summer program, because the rates for those programs have to be set by SED as well. There is no statute of limitations on rate changes. So, a student that went to a program 10 years ago, let's say, that program could, theoretically have a rate change, and your aid could get adjusted, now due to that rate change. And that often creates a lot of problems, mostly for the STAC unit, because they're going back and constantly recalculating the aid for districts due to rate changes. But you'll often get notification that a rate was, your aid was amended by a rate change. You don't have to go in and restack the child or amend the STAC. That aid gets adjusted automatically for rate changes. So if you run your own summer program and perhaps you never went through the lovely task of getting your rates set, you can go back and do that, since there's no statute of limitations on rates or rate changes. Many districts don't realize that they have to get the rates set by the state, and often will go many years running their own program and not really getting any reimbursement for the education portion of it, even though they stack the students, because they didn't have any rate. 80% of zero is zero. So if there's no rate, there's no reimbursement. This also bears watching for placements that you send to another provider. If you send them to a BOCES or a private school, if that provider does not have a rate set for that program, you will not get any reimbursement. So program providers are responsible for getting their own rates set. And the first step that they have to do is the program has to be approved by VESID first, and then you would go through getting the rate set. For public school districts, the way you would do this is you would complete the ST3 supplemental schedules SS10 through SS16 to obtain your rate. There's a lot of details to these schedules. Essentially, they're asking you for the financial cost of running this program. And you can include things here that you can't typically include in the 10-month claims. For example, when you're filling out these rate schedules, there is sections where you can include administrative costs and facility costs. And I would urge districts to try to include as much as they can rates. There are limitations and caps as to, how much you can include of the non-direct care costs, as well as, what your rate can be regionally. However, the first year that you run your program, it's important that you get a really good rate because they allow these rates to increase by only so much each year. You can kind of think of it as a CPI. They call it a cost adjustment factor. So they allow the rates to grow by only so much each year. So it's important that the first year you run the program, you get a good solid rate that truly captures all your costs for the program, and then that rate would be allowed to grow only so much each year. If your expenditures increase by more than what the rate was allowed to grow by, you can request a waiver. It's not an easy process, but some districts I know have been successful in doing so. But you definitely do want to include all the costs associated with the program. The more costs that you are able to build into your rate, the greater your reimbursement would be. So that's really the key thing for districts that run their own program, or maybe if you're thinking about running your own program, aside from stacking the students, you would have to complete the SS10 through 16 each year as part of your ST3 submission, and that has to be done yearly with the cost of that year's summer programs included in there. And that's an area that a lot of districts, because those schedules are rather cumbersome, have a lot of problems with getting them completed. There's a lot to completing those schedules. A lot of detail goes into them. You have to record the various positions and the salaries and the FTEs of the different positions of the providers and things like that. Also, the schedules must tie back to your special aid fund. So there's a lot of reconciliation that takes place, and lots of times districts don't complete them accurately, and that often holds up the rate-setting process. So the program may not be reimbursed because the financial data that was submitted was not accurate, or some of it's missing. So if you do run your own program or thinking about it, you definitely want to pay attention to these supplemental schedules and make sure that you stay on top of making sure that your rates get set, and you work with the rate setting unit at the state ed department, whoever's assigned to your district, to make sure that the rates are processed timely and that they don't get left behind. Something new this year regarding the transportation costs that are entered on the summer stacks that became effective with recording the summer 2008 expenditures. The transportation costs that you enter on the stack forms must reconcile back to the summer transportation costs that you record in the new ST3 codes that they put in place, F55 11.16 through F55 98. There's a link I have for you on this slide to the memo that came out regarding this new change that occurred with this year's ST3. Basically, it's a way for them to have a reconciliation, sort of a checks and balances from what you record on the stack forms to what you actually record on your ST3. So that's something new that we saw. Just like all the other stack placements that you have, the final part of the process is verification of your summer stacks through the online AVL process. This is another AVL process that went paperless starting with summer 08. So that was the first year that you could verify your summer stacks on the online system. Years prior to that were still verified on paper. They are getting ready to do a March payment for summer 2008 and summer 2009. So it's advisable that you go to the online system and you verify those summer stacks for summer '08 and summer '09, and those verifications have to be in by February 19th. That's the next Friday, a week from this Friday, for the March payment for those stacks to be included in the March payment. So they have put in place for you on the STAC unit's website something that they typically do to monitor your online verifications. They call it the Gold Star status. And you can go onto the STAC unit's website on their home page at the very top, and you can click on the link to see if your district has received a Gold Star. And if you have a Gold Star, that means you have verified all your summer '08 and summer '09 stacks that were filed. If you don't, it will tell you in the last column how many have not been verified yet, and you'd want to make sure you get them verified by February 19th so that they can be included in the March payments. One other thing I want to mention, just as in the private, you want to make sure that the rates for your providers for summer programs are what you're getting billed. Once again, you're only aided on that approved rate, not on what you pay the provider. So you want to, hopefully they're one and the same, but often we find that they're not. It's kind of a catch-22 when you run into a situation where a provider has charged you more than what their state-approved rate is. You certainly could, deny paying it, but then they would probably deny taking the student. So you really don't have a whole lot of choice here, but it's something that you certainly should be in contact with the provider, to find out what the problem is with their rate and why it's not up to what they're billing you, because you will only get aided based on what the approved rate is. Okay, we covered a lot of stuff regarding the stacks just now with your public, private, and summer placements. I want to just show you this chart here that you can actually see this also on the STAC unit's website. They have this out there for your viewing. I just sort of took some of the dates there and kind of streamlined it for you a little bit. But for the common placements that we talked about, your public 10 months and private 10 months, and the summer, these are the STAC and AVL filing deadlines. Remember, as part of the process, you do the STAC form first, and then you do the verification after. So if you take a look at the first box here, the public 10-month and private 10-month, you can see that if you look at the 2008-2009 STAC year, they're aided now during 9/10. And in order for your aid to be paid on a current year basis, which is what you always want to aim for, the STAC forms for all these 2008-09 10-month placements have to be filed by May 1st, 2010. And then they have to get in by May 1st, 2010 to be captured on the last AVL that they run for that year for the 08-09 students, which is run at the beginning of May, and it's due back June 30th. So the STAC forms have to be filed by May 1st, and then the AVL has to be filed verifying those stacks by June 30th, 2010. Currently, they still do allow you to go 1 year beyond that. If you have any placements that you haven't aided, you can see in the next section of the box, for prior year aid, you have 1 year beyond that, May 1st, 2011 for the STAC, and June 30th, 2011 for the AVL, but you're in prior year adjustment status, and that typically means districts will wait anywhere from 5 to 7 years to get the funding. So you obviously really want to try to avoid prior year adjustment status in any way possible. Something else to note, that the governor is proposing doing away with prior year claims. Basically, you would have to get the stacks filed by the deadlines that are listed under current year aid in order to get funding. After that, you basically lose your chance. So that is something that the governor is proposing. The districts would no longer have that additional year. And I believe that's applying to all aid categories, including STAC forms or excess cost aid. So another reason why you really want to try to avoid the prior year adjustment status, because we don't really know how long that's even going to be available. Under summer, you can see in the bottom box, you're given a much greater window of time for these placements. Currently, you can still go back and stack your 2006-2007 summer, so summer 2006. You can stack those students by May 1st, 2010, and verify them by June 30th, 2010, and still get funding for them. So they give you a lot more time with the summer stacks. It is a separate pot of money by which they pay summer programs out of, so it doesn't fall into that prior year adjustment status that we typically see with 10-month aid claims. Okay, next we're going to go through the STAC timeline. And as I mentioned before, I put this together so that you can kind of get a sense of when during the year things should be done to try to stay on top of the process and get all your STAC forms in and verified timely. As we go through this timeline, it kind of assumes that you're up to date with your STAC filings. So obviously, at any point in time, if you haven't filed the prior year's claims in the area, you would want to do those first, obviously. For example, under July and August, you should file the STAC forms for the current year summer placements and verify them through the online system. You can do the verifications as soon as the program is over when you know that the student has gone the full 6 weeks. So you don't have to wait. Once the online verifications are up there on the online screen, you can go ahead and verify them once the summer program is over, and then it's done and you don't have to worry about it. Obviously, if you haven't filed the STAC forms for the prior year summer, you would want to do that first. But assuming those have been done, you should be filing STAC forms for the current summer in the current summer, July and August. In September and October is when you'd want to start doing the calculations for the current year's in-district high-cost students. You should do this at the beginning of the school year. And a lot of districts think that they need to wait until the school year is over so that they know exactly what the final costs were in case the child had program changes or left early or something like that. But there's plenty of opportunities throughout the whole STAC process to amend costs and enrollment dates. I mean, at any given time now with the online system, you can go in and do an amendment to a STAC form if you're aware of a child that left the district or a change in a program that changed the cost. Also, even if you don't do amendments throughout the year, you can always do the final costing, which you have to do anyway on the AVL when you verify the STAC the year after. So you have plenty of opportunity to change costs. So don't wait to get the current year stacks in until the year is over. You should try to stack them at the beginning of the year as soon as the placements are made. And this helps with cash flow. It helps with state aid projections and a whole bunch of other things. So you really don't want to wait. So you can calculate the costs in September and October. You already have the data that you need. Salaries, your teachers' contracts hopefully have been settled, and your salary, schedules have been developed. You know exactly who's serving who, class lists and 1-to-1 assignments. All that stuff is done for the beginning of the school year, so you can start doing the in-district calculations in September and October. Also, as far as the BOCES placements go, you should have an estimate of what the BOCES programs are costing you based on the initial service requests that you did in the spring before the year started. So even if those costs are not exact, you should have a pretty good idea of what those programs cost, so you can get those STAC forms in as well with the estimate of what you think those programs are going to be. In November and December is when we see the first AVL coming out. And that's going to be listing the prior year in-district public placements. So this past November and December, you received the first AVL for your 08-09 students, and it was the list of the students that were in district programs. And basically what you need to do on that AVL is verify the costs and the enrollment dates of that student's placement. And it's not really called an AVL. They call it the High Cost STAC 3 Amendment Report. HCSAR is really what it says at the top. But it looks just like an AVL. It's really a type of AVL, and it comes on the green bar paper, just like all the other AVLs. So we call it an AVL just because it's simpler. But you will see that other acronym at the top of the form, HCSAR, is really what it's called. They give you about a month to send that back. I believe it was due back mid-December this year. If for some reason you didn't get that or you weren't able to get it processed in time, don't worry, those students will show up again on the next AVL, which you'll see later on in the timeline. So AVLs are cumulative in nature in that once you verify a student on them, they won't show up on the next AVL unless a change has been made to their STAC form. So the very first AVL comes out November and December for the prior year in-district students. At that point in time, the year is over, the 08-09 year was over, so you know exactly what those final costs would have been, and if the child left early or a new child came in. So certainly, that is an opportunity for you to make changes, as I mentioned before. Moving on to January and February is when we obtain the final 10-month cost reports from our BOCES. Usually they come out for most BOCES in the fall, late December. This is where they should list for you the student's name and the dates of enrollment in the BOCES program and show you the final annualized cost after any refund. And you need that report because you have to amend the BOCES STAC forms to reflect any refund that you receive back from BOCES. So it's important that you get that report and you get it in timely from your BOCES because you will get the second AVL in February. That's the one we're getting ready to see any day now that I mentioned earlier. And that will list your prior year BOCES placements. So hopefully by the end of this week or sometime next week, you should be getting the BOCES AVL for your 08-09 students. And you need that 10-month finalized cost report from BOCES so that you can amend those BOCES tuitions for any refund that you might have received from your BOCES. And there's another opportunity for you to change any of the enrollment dates if a child left early, let's say. So you want to make sure when you're looking at this final report from BOCES that you use the 10-month cost, the one that shows after refund. And if a student was not there the entire year, that 10-month cost should reflect what the annualized cost would be. And then just like I mentioned earlier, you're going to, on the STAC form, have the start and end dates, where you'll also see them on the AVL, and that automatically prorates that 10-month cost. So make sure you pick up the 10-month cost from that BOCES final cost report when you're completing that AVL. This is a time when you also want to review the current year public and private STAC forms that you entered in the fall. You want to make any additions or amendments to them. It's a good idea to use the database reports, your IEP Direct reports, to make sure that you've captured students. You're halfway through the year now, so if you had some kids that might have left or some kids that came in or some changes in programs, you should be able to make sure that you've captured everyone. Once again, if the costs are not 100% exactly what they're going to end up being, that's okay because you have time to amend them through the AVL process later. But you want to make sure that all the stacks are in for the current year. Because as you can see, when you move down to the March and April time period, is when the reapplication lists come out. Typically, we see them come out in late March, and basically what the reapplication listing is it gives you an opportunity to look at the stacks that you had in for the current year and a chance to reapp those stacks for the coming year so that you don't have to start entering STAC 1 forms again next year. So this March, we should see the reapplication listings come out. It will list the students that you stacked for the 2009-2010 school year. And basically what they're asking you is if any of these students are going to continue on to 10-11, just to re-app them and put in what you think the estimated cost is going to be. Keep the cost the same if you don't know at this point what the new cost is going to be. At least those students will stay in the system. And this will help you with state aid projections, because when they're projecting your aid for the coming years, they typically look back at historical averages of your stacks. And if you haven't been timely with filing them, you're not going to have a good historical average to build those state aid projections upon. So it's important that you get your current year stacks in and filed certainly by March, so that you have reapplication listings available to re-app for the coming year. If you don't have the stacks filed by March for 9-10, then there isn't going to be a list to reapply for 10-11. And then once 10-11 comes, you're going to have to start with entering those stack forms all over again, like you would at the beginning of the process. So it saves an awful lot of work, and like I said, it really helps with those state aid projections. You also want to review all the 10-month prior year public and private placements to ensure that you didn't leave any students out or make any mistakes. You can stack any additions or changes. They have to be in by May 1st. If you remember, going back to our, you can click back here to our STAC and AVL filing deadlines. You want to pay attention to these May 1st dates here. So you want to make sure that your prior year, this year 8-9 stacks, are in by May 1st. So looking at that in March and April will help you avoid the rush of trying to get them in by May 1st. If we move on to May and June, the last of the AVLs for the prior year stacks will be out beginning of May. And any students that were not verified on the first AVL that you got in November, December, or on the second one that you received in February will show up on this third one that you get in May. It has to be returned to the STAC unit by June 30th if you want to capture the aid within the current year aid timeline. So, you know, if you missed verifying a student, or let's say you verified a student back in the fall and then you realized you made a mistake and you went in and you changed their STAC form, they will show up on the subsequent AVLs. Certainly you want to get all the students and all the stacks verified by that third AVL that comes out in May and have that back in by June 30th to get your aid paid as a current year aid. Also, you, at this point, want to go into the online AVL system for your private placements, because remember, those are not verified on paper. Those are verified through the online verification process. So you want to go in May and verify the 0809, or in this case, it's the prior year, in this case, the 0809 private stacks by June 30th. Again, so that aid is paid as a current year aid. They usually set up that gold star chart, once again, for private 10-month verifications. That usually comes out in May. You can go to the STAC online system and click on your district to see if you have verified all your prior year private placement stacks and get your gold star. You actually could go in and verify them now. You don't really have to wait until May. If you verify them now, then you will already have a gold star right when they put the list out there. So the year is over now, 0809 is over. You know for sure if the student went to the private school, and you know for sure what the enrollment dates were. So you can, no reason why you can't go and do that verification now. The online AVLs are out there and available for 0809 private placements now. Just a note that this timeline that I put together for you is to be used as a general guideline. It's based on the approximate times that historically the STAC unit has released AVLs and processed reports and things like that. It is subject to change. Historically, the dates that I have listed in this timeline are the historic times that the STAC unit has released, for example, the AVLs. I did talk with them just the other day. They have not mailed out that February AVL yet. They're hoping to get it out, I think, by the end of this week or next week. So you should have it by the end of February. And like I said, they usually give you about 30 days to get it back. So it'll be due back the end of March. So be on the lookout for that, definitely. Hopefully you found this timeline helpful, and you can kind of use it as a guide to knowing when things should be done, making sure that you don't miss any of the deadlines, and just being proactive in the process so that you're not caught under the gun getting stuff filed by deadlines. Okay, next I want to spend just a little bit of time talking about how you can tell if STACs are being filed in your district and filed accurately. It's a way for you to implement some checks and balances, especially between business office and the special ed department. If you go to the STAC online system for your district, there is, at the very top of the main menu, there is an option for you to pull approval listings down. And basically on this screen, you can pick various years, placements, and providers to see if STACs have been filed. It's a good idea to pull approval listings for the different types of placements to see if STAC forms are filed, and also to go back and pull them for the prior years just to be able to compare one year from the next so that you can get a sense of, let's say you had 100 STACs filed for 2007-08, and you pull up 08-09 and you see there's only 30, well, that might kind of, trigger a question why so few students for the same type of placement, are being stacked for 08-09. So that could, pose some questions. Are all STAC forms in for 08-09? And it's probably a good idea for you to go in and do this now while you still have some time to get those 08-09 STACs in. So this is a tool that you can use, and just a sense of comparing one year to the next. Take note of new and missing students for kids that might have aged out or moved out of the district, and new kids that came in. So it's a good idea to look at these approval listings. You also should pull your database reports from ClearTrack and IEP Direct and run lists. Hopefully, if information was entered accurately and in the proper places on the IEPs, you should be able to get good lists for your different types of placements to make sure, once again, you've captured everyone. Certainly look at the bills that BOCES send you and the private school bills. If you have a student there, I'm sure they're going to bill you, so that's a great way for you to check and make sure that STAC forms have been filed for all your BOCES placements and private school placements. You can run approval listings from the STAC online system and compare them to your BOCES bill, and that's a great way to make sure that you've captured the BOCES students, that you haven't left any STACs out. Another way is to review your public and private excess cost aid trends over the last few years. You can go on to the state aid unit's website and pull your public and private excess cost aid output reports. You can go back several years and look at them, and look at the changes in your aid from one year to the next. These are all tools that I often use when I go into a district and look at how they're doing with the STAC process. Lots of times changes in the aids in these categories will signify that maybe STACs haven't been filed, or there's been a change in the way maybe they calculated the in-district cost, so not as many students qualified or more students qualified, so the aid went up. Your aid ratio and your threshold, although it changes each year, usually doesn't change by that much to show that significant change in your aid. So it's one of the tools that you can use to get a sense of how things are being done and if they're being done accurately. For the most part, your aid should stay fairly consistent, barring any major changes in your ratio or your threshold. So another good tool to use. The business office should really be involved in this process. It is, the AVL process particularly, because it's the final part of the claim process for STACs. It's what brings the money in the door. So the business office really does need to be involved in that process, and they should be reviewing them prior to submission. There's a place for the business office's superintendent to sign off on the AVLs, and the reason for that is that they really want them taking a look at, the financial data that's been claimed on these AVLs, and you should be reviewing how those in-district calculations are done. Hopefully you've been involved in the process in doing them, whereby you've been getting the information to the special ed department for them. So another thing that the two offices really should be working together to make sure that the process is effective. Next, we're going to talk about the state aid reporting for your parentally placed students in non-public schools. This is something that has gotten a lot of attention, particularly in the last few years as a result of the change in the law. Prior to a few years ago, students that were in non-public schools that were located within your district boundaries were really the responsibility of the home district, making sure that they were identified and received the services that they needed, and the home district took care of either contracting with the local public school district or the BOCES, or they provided the services to them themselves. A few years ago that changed, and now it's the district of location. That's the district where the non-public school is located, is really responsible for the CSE function, the evaluations, providing the services, and then, of course, billing back the home district for those costs. So that law has gotten a lot of attention. There's a lot of problems that surround it. I'm sure some of you are familiar with that. And because of that, we need to pay a little bit more attention to how we report these students for state aid purposes. In the billing process, when you bill the home district, sometimes there's instances where you have to credit them the state aid that you received on behalf of these students. So if you're going to pass along that state aid credit, you want to make sure that you're getting the state aid and that you're not passing along the credit without getting the state aid. And if you don't properly report these students, you won't be generating the aid for them. So the area at which you want to pay attention to is Schedule B of your state aid claim forms. It's one of the sub-schedules, if you will, of Form A, your attendance form that you complete each year. It's called Schedule B, dual enrolled students. There's 4 sections to this schedule. Sections 1 and Section 2 deal with gifted and talented students and career education students, so we're not going to even talk about those today. What you want to pay attention to for special ed students that you're giving services to would be Section 3 and Section 4 of Schedule B. And on this slide here, I sort of did a little makeup of what those 2 sections look like in case you're not familiar with this schedule. Basically, the students that you record here are going to be included in the pupil count used in paying your foundation aid. Assuming that foundation aid is not frozen. Basically, the pupil count that they're included in is the total aidable foundation pupil unit, or we use the acronym TAFPU for total aidable foundation pupil unit. And students that you record here under Section 3 and Section 4 are included in that pupil count, and that's how they generate aid for the district. So if you're going to pass along that state aid deduction when you're billing the home district, then you want to make sure that you're recording the students correctly here on Schedule B. As you can see, under Section 3 is where you're going to be recording the aggregate attendance of the students with disabilities. And I'll just flip here to the next slide where I'm kind of detailing the various sections for you. If you printed the slideshow out, you can maybe put the previous slide next to this one so you can see the areas of Section B that I'm talking about. But Section 3 is where you record the aggregate attendance, which is the same as saying the total sum of student attendance days for these students. And as you can see here, the minimum time period per day that you're going to be recording students here would be if they're getting services at least one period per day. So a student that's getting services less than that would not be recorded on Schedule B at all. They would not generate foundation aid, and we'll talk in a minute about the billing process back to the home district. You can see then that you wouldn't pass along that state aid credit because they're not getting enough services to generate that additional aid. But if they're getting at least one period per day, then you record their sum of total attendance days here, and this gets included in average daily membership, ADM, another acronym that we see used in the foundation aid formula. It's just another variable in that calculation, and that's used to pay the regular foundation aid per pupil. And this is the foundation aid that you get for all pupils in the district. That count is included in average daily membership. Under Section 4 of Schedule B is where you record the full-time equivalent, the FTE, of the students with disabilities. And here, the minimum time for recording students here is going to be 2 periods per day. And that's to be consistent with the equivalent of at least 20% of the week, where you're getting additional aid under the foundation aid formula for any special ed students that you serve at least 20% of the week. They give you an additional weighting under foundation aid. And you can see here students recorded under Section 4 are included in the additional pupil count for the additional foundation aid weighting of 1.41. You can go to your total aidable foundation pupil unit output report on the state aid website, and you can take a look at how Section 3 is added to the other pupil counts to become part of the total average daily membership, and how Section 4 is added to the FTE of students with disabilities to pay that additional foundation aid for special education students. So Section 3 and Section 4 of Schedule B is where you would be recording these students depending on the level of service. Obviously, if you have a student under Section 3, at least 1 period a day, they're also going to be under Section 4 to 2 periods per day. When you bill back the home district for the net cost of special ed services, you can also bill for the CSE administration and the cost of evaluations under this new law. When you're billing for the special ed services is where you would deduct the state aid from the formula that you use to bill them. SED has put out on the state aid unit's website, and I've included here the 2 links, one for the 2008-09 year and one for 2009-10. These are Excel spreadsheets that they put together for you to do the aid calculation to determine how much to deduct from the cost of providing the special ed services. And essentially, if you look at both of these for both years, the spreadsheets, they don't really differ all that much. The formula itself doesn't really differ. But you can see that you get to a certain point on the formula whereby if the student is getting services less than that 20%, they're not really going to generate a state aid deduction, and they typically would not really be recorded, especially under Section 4 of Schedule B. So you're not going to have any credit of state aid to pass along to the home district because the student didn't get enough services to generate aid for the district. So there shouldn't be any state aid credit that goes to the home district when billing them. But you have the 2 links here. If you haven't billed for your students that you provide service to in the non-public for 08-09, you certainly want to get those out right away. And you should be tracking, the expenditures for 9-10 now and billing. Some districts bill monthly, some bill a few times a year. I've also seen some that wait till the year is over to send the billing out. So, but certainly keep track of the data throughout the year. Also, as part of this law, you need to deduct the proportionate share of federal funds. And there's memos about this law and links to information regarding the federal fund share to deduct on VESID's website. So if you haven't been familiar with those memos, I would urge you to take a look at those available on VESID's website. Lastly, where can you get some help with all the stuff we discussed today? I know I rushed through a lot of it, had a lot of information to cover here in a short period of time to do it in. We are going to be available for questions and answers, and there's some contact information for you. Certainly, if there's something you feel I can help you with, or if you have any questions whatsoever at all on this presentation or any material that we covered today, I have for you my phone number and my email address. The STAC and Special Aid Unit, Ed Truax and Kelly Mason are both really great people up there that know their stuff, and there's their phone number and their website. And the State Aid Unit, Bruce Jeslowski is the gentleman that deals a lot with the State Aid claim forms and the Schedule B data, and that's his number and website. So I think I'm going to turn it back over now to Donna for questions and answers.
Okay, Lisa, thank you so very much for your information, and we actually have 8 questions for you to answer. Okay. So I'm just going to start immediately. Ronnie Lalo says that, can you please give an example of a student in an in-district placement?
A student that would be in a self-contained classroom, or a student that has a one-to-one aid in an in-district program would be an example of a student that could potentially qualify for high-cost aid. You're obviously not going to know for sure if they qualify until you do the costing out, but you can kind of get a sense of what it's going to cost you once you do a couple of the calculations for a few of these kids. So certainly you want to look at the kids in self-contained classrooms, especially the smaller ones, whereby you're taking the teacher's salary and benefits divided by the number of students in the classroom to get a cost per student, and then you add in the related services that they're getting, and if they have a one-to-one aid and any other costs that are associated with the services that their IEP requires. Did that answer the question?
Well, Ronnie will let us know.
Oh, okay. In here? Okay, sorry.
Okay. Mary Gibson says, if specialized equipment is purchased through a grant, can this cost be put on a STAC?
Say that again, if specialized equipment was funded through a grant?
Right.
No. In fact, that's a really good question. Any costs that you pay for with grant money, even if you pay for a particular staff member or equipment or services, you cannot include that cost in the calculation for the STAC form. That would be considered double dipping, and they do not allow that. So certainly when you're doing these calculations, you do not want to include anything that was paid for with grant money.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a question from Peter Folan. He says, can you give me an example of what SED recommends for calculating a facility cost? Is it classroom or square footage, etc., for a 4408 placement?
Yes, for calculating, I think he's referring to the supplemental schedules, SS 10 through 16. At the bottom of SS 11 is where you would put facility costs to be included in the rate for your summer programs. And the best way to do that is to prorate the cost of that building based on the square footage that the classrooms occupy. So, for example, if your summer program uses up 2 classrooms based on that square footage, prorate the facility cost being, certainly utility bills, debt service. You can also include that. You'll see a line for that at the bottom of SS 11. Other facility costs are going to be for staff members that are in charge of buildings, grounds, security guards, janitorial staff. Those are all the job codes that are listed under facility costs at the bottom of SS 11 that you can include in building your rate for your summer program.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We have a second question from Mary Gibson, and she says, Special Education Office completes an approval form to run a summer program. Does this approval form need to be reapproved each year? That's the first part.
Okay.
And is there a form that needs to be sent to SED, or is it automatic each year?
Okay, for your full day and your half day programs, that would be program code 9000 for the full day program and 9010 for the half day program. You do not need to get program approval every year if the program is staying the same. However, if you're running just related services only programs, which come under the code of 9015, that's going to be just related services only, related services with specialized instruction only, or home hospital care. All those 4 programs come under the umbrella of program code 9015, and they do have to be reapplied for every year. There is a form that comes out. VESID has that. You can also speak with your regional VESID associate about getting those forms, but they have to be filled out usually in the spring each year for running that program for the coming summer. So related services only type programs do have to be reapplied for every single year, but the standard full day and half day programs typically do not if the programs are staying the same as they were when they were first approved.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Let's see. I lost my spot. We have Marianne O'Brien, and she has 2 questions, and I'll ask these separately.
Okay.
First one is, can we stack related services for summer placements?
Can you stack? Say that again. I'm sorry.
Can we stack related services for summer placements?
Yes, you should be stacking students that get just related services for the summer, be it if they get related services just at BOCES or if they're getting related services through an in-district program. You would stack those students. You would indicate on the stack form that their program is program code 9015. If that provider, whoever that might be, if it's you, the school district, or if it's BOCES, if they have approval to run that program, then when you do the stack form, you should see that program listed under that provider. You stack that student, and you're going to put on the stack form the number of half-hour sessions of that related service. These programs are aided at a regional rate. You do not have to fill out supplemental schedules SS10 through 16 if you run your own related services only program because they are aided at a regional rate, but you do have to stack the students indicating the number of half-hour sessions that the student is receiving of the related services. They have had a problem, just as an additional note here, with determining the funding for these programs. They made this change a few years ago that they're aided at a regional rate. They have not reimbursed districts since like summer 2004 for related services only programs because they're working out some of the details regarding the regional rate. But you still should be stacking them because my hope is that sooner or later they do fund these programs. So continue to stack these kids, indicating the half-hour sessions on the stack form.
Okay, and the second part of Marianne's question, Marianne O'Brien, is there a limit on the dollar amount per child for summer transportation?
There's a limit as to what the stack system will take. I believe it's not greater than $5,000. When you go to enter the transportation on the stack form, it won't take anything more than $5,000. However, if you incur costs greater than that, when you complete the AVL for summer placements is when you would put the actual amount over the $5,000. Let's say it's $6,000. And often they want you to include backup invoices or something detailing the cost and why it's greater than $5,000. The online stack system, starting with summer 2008, where you're verifying the kids online, does not have a mechanism yet for you to do transportation costs. They're working on that, and hopefully we'll have that out soon. On the older summers prior to 2008, when you did the AVL, you could put in the additional, higher cost over $5,000 on the AVL. But since we went to the online verification starting with summer 2008, there's really no way to indicate transportation costs on that online AVL system yet. So they haven't aided transportation yet for summer '08 or summer '09. Once they come out with the mechanism to do that, there will be a way for you to indicate the actual transportation cost, and then the funding hopefully will come.
Okay, and we have about 4 or 5 more questions here.
Okay.
Alexandria Battaglia has a statement, and she says, how can a district justify not stacking in-house students because the record keeping is difficult? In private industry, this would never fly.
I agree, and a lot of districts don't stack their in-district students because they truly don't think they have any kids that exceed their high-cost threshold. But, districts that have high-cost thresholds have high-cost thresholds because they have high expenditures. They pay their teachers a lot of money. And when you're costing out a student in a district that, has, teachers and aides that make a lot of money, you'd be surprised how quickly those in-district tuitions go up. And many districts are very surprised when they actually sit down and do it to find how many high-cost kids they actually do have in in-district programs.
Okay, thank you. And we have a question from Kevin Castle, and Kevin says, how do we claim aid for students with disabilities that are in a non-public school that is not located in our district?
This is a student that's parentally placed. I understand.
It doesn't say. How do we claim aid for students with disabilities that are in a non-public school that is not located in our district?
Well, the district where the non-public school is located is going to be the district that provides the services and claims the student for aid on Schedule B. And then when they bill back the home district, which I assume in this example would be him, then they should be crediting him the aid that they've generated on behalf of his student. So he shouldn't be claiming the aid. The district that's educating them claims the aid and passes that along to the home district that gets billed. I think I answered his question.
Okay. Now, we are having a webinar tomorrow about the parentally placed and IDEA guidance, so maybe that's something that we can answer there as well.
Okay.
We have just 3 more minutes, and we have a few more questions. If we don't get to your question, we will definitely send you an email with an answer that all of you will be able to see. Colleen DiCaprio has a 2-parter here. It says, with regards to the enrollment figures for parentally placed students, are you stating that if we have students that are attending a private school in our district and receiving special ed services, that we report this enrollment in Section 3 and 4?
Yes, provided that they're getting the services for the minimum times listed there, which under Section 3 is 1 period a day, under Section 4 is 2 periods per day.
Okay, and then Colleen also wants to know, how do you go about reporting a student missed in the previous year's STAC?
The STAC wasn't done. You can go back as long as it's within the statute of limitations that I had on that slide for AVL deadlines or STAC and AVL deadlines. You can just go back into the online system and file the STAC for the prior year.
Okay, and we have a question here from Beth Gillette. Who completes the STAC for a child who is parentally placed in another district in a private school? The district who is sending the invoice or the district where the student resides?
STACs are always done by the CSE district, so the district that has CSE responsibility is going to be the district that files the STAC form.
Okay, we have 2 more. Let's see what we can do here. Peter Folan says, what is SED's current recommendation for costing out in-district placements during the year when students' enrollments in program models change? For example, what should be done when a 6+1+2 model in October changes to a 4+1+2 model in February?
I don't think you're really expected to redo the calculations every time a kid comes in or out of the classroom. What I've been told from the STAC unit is use the number of students that are in the classroom during most of the year. What I've done is basically, calculate the FTE of all the students and total that up, and the total FTE is what I would use as the divisor, during the year. That really gives you the truest, enrollment figure to divide the cost by to get a cost per student. Go ahead.
Okay. And Kevin Castle just has a follow-up. He says, we do not get aid on the net expense. And I think it goes back to his question.
Which was his question?
His was, let's see, how do we claim aid for students with disabilities that are in a non-public school that's not located in our district? And then he went down to...
I think I understand what he's saying. No, on the net cost, no.
On net expense.
On the net expense, you don't get aid. The aid's already been claimed by the educating district and passed on to you. You can't get aid on that net cost again.
Okay.
I understand what he's saying.
Okay. If not, Kevin, just let us know. Well,
Okay.
Thank you so very much, Lisa. Good information, good questions. Thank you all for participating. And we have a webinar tomorrow on guidance on IDEA billing. Maybe you'll join us then, and otherwise we look forward to joining us on another ASBO event. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes today's New York State ASBO webinar.
The moderator has